Very good evening everyone. Welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu news analysis. So today is 3rd June 2025 and today we have some very important articles for the discussion. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's try to understand all these important topics in a very detailed manner so that this discussion will be helpful for your prelims and mains examination as well. Here I would like to remind you one thing, that a lot of questions in this year prelims examination have been reflected from our news analysis. So if you regularly follow our news analysis, the most of the current affairs topics we would cover from these sessions. And the first topic with which we're going to start the session is about the increasing number of COVID-19 cases again in India. So we can call it as the resurgence of the COVID-19 again. However, this article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this will be important for your prelims and mains examinations as well. From prelims point of view, you can understand what is COVID-19 pandemic and how the COVID-19 pandemic infects the human beings. And from the mains perspective also, you can understand how COVID-19 pandemic is going to impact India's healthcare system. So firstly, let's have a look at the context of the editorial. So it is even said that India has been witnessing a gradual increase in the COVID-19 cases. However, the increase in the COVID-19 cases has been reported from mid-2025. And in fact, in several places or in several cities, the COVID-19 cases have been substantially increasing in India. However, along with increasing number of COVID-19 cases, the wastewater surveillance mechanism that has been already established to monitor the COVID-19 pandemic and the virus. So this surveillance has indicated that there has been a substantial increase in the SARS-CoV-2 viral load as well. So what does this mean when the SARS-CoV-2 viral load increases in the wastewater? So that essentially means that there is a re-emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, a similar trend is being observed in other Asian countries. So this is not just limited to India, but in other countries also, particularly in Asian countries, this trend has been observed. So therefore, it has resulted in creation of or resulting in certain concerns among the people as well as the public healthcare system, because there is a potential or there is a chance of new variants which could emerge and that could likely infect the human beings on a larger scale. And in fact, we call it COVID-19 in terms of waves. The first wave of COVID-19, second wave of COVID-19, because so during the first wave of the COVID-19, most of the population in India, not just in India but in other countries also, they were adequately vaccinated, and vaccination helped in immunization of the individuals in an adequate manner. So the development of immunity to the COVID-19 virus has led to the resultant waves largely ineffective. So even though there are number of waves of a COVID-19 virus or variants of COVID-19 virus, so those variants are largely ineffective because all Indians were already immunized. So number of vaccines, for example, the Covaxin vaccine of Bharat Biotech and Covishield vaccine of Serum Institute of India were used for the large-scale vaccination of Indians. Now we will understand the emerging seasonal trends of COVID-19 in India. Within the COVID-19 pandemic or within the virus, there are a number of variants which are emerging from time to time. However, here the key concern is that will those variants pose any public health threat in India? Because one thing that we should understand here is that the public health architecture or public health system in India is already constrained. So why it is said that the public health system is constrained? Because we have a less number of medical professionals, either doctors or staff nurses. We have a less number of medical professionals, and we also have a less number of patient to bed ratio, or less number of beds in our hospitals, and we also have the poor hospital infrastructure as well. And in fact, most of the hospital infrastructure or hospitals are overstrained because of a lack of facilities. And taking this as an advantage, the private healthcare sector has dominated the most of the healthcare in India. Private healthcare now dominated more than around 50% of India's healthcare. And in fact, with the domination of the private healthcare institutions, the total out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure is also increasing. So as of now in India, 43% is the total out-of-pocket healthcare expenditure of individuals. Now in this context, it is very important that in order to equip the healthcare system adequately to deal with the future pandemics, we need to substantially invest in our healthcare infrastructure. So not just infrastructure, so it also include increasing number of medical professionals. Apart from that, we should also take adequate care when it comes to the diagnostic facilities, setting up primary healthcare facilities, and also integrating the already existing the primary healthcare centers or health and wellness centers under Ayushman Bharat health insurance scheme, Ayushman Bharat health insurance scheme. And we should also make sure that there is a robust implementation of National Digital Health Mission as well. Now coming back to the topic, so as I have already told you that the new variants of COVID-19 pandemic, they are re-emerging, and they are also causing a large scale public health problems in India by infecting number of individuals. And in fact, a new variant called JN1 variant, and this JN1 variant is considered as a sublineage of the Omicron virus. And in fact, the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 pandemic, we very well knew about this particular variant of the COVID-19 because it has created some challenges during 2023. So therefore, this JN1 is a subvariant or sublineage of the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, this Omicron is considered as a dominant strain globally and in India also. So therefore, this JN1, a sublineage of the Omicron virus, has been first detected in the Luxembourg in August 2023, and in India it was found in late 2023. However, so it has shown no significant clinical deviation from earlier Omicron sublineages. So therefore, it is also similar to the Omicron variant. However, there are other sublineages of the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 virus, particularly LF.7 and NB.1.8. And in fact, these two variants have been emerged from JN1, and this JN1 is again a sublineage of the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 pandemic. So however, when we compare the clinical severity of all these different variants, so they remain mild, and in fact there is no surge in hospitalization or mortality. Now imagine if a particular individual is infected with any of these sublineages, so there will be no severe symptoms developed in this particular individual, and there will be no need for the hospitalization or even mortality as well. So therefore, even though the COVID-19 cases have been increasing in India, so this has been indicating that there is no need to worry at this point of time. And in fact, no variant of concern has emerged since 2021. So therefore, there is no need for any significant concern because they are not leading to the hospitalization, mortality, or even the severe symptoms among those infected individuals. And in fact, after the COVID-19 pandemic, most of the Indian public have been adequately immunized, and that has been led to the population level hybrid immunity. And in fact, this population level hybrid immunity from the vaccines that we have already administered, the natural infections reinforces are the possibility, or reinfections are the possibility, right? However, immunity effectively prevents severe diseases, underscoring a waning antibodies but a robust memory cell responses as well. So this has been indicating that despite having immunity, there is a possibility that the natural infections or reinfections can infect the individuals as well. However, there are certain reasons behind the uptick or increase in the COVID-19 pandemic. So we will try to understand what are the major reasons behind the increase in the upsurge of the COVID-19 pandemic. So firstly, the respiratory viruses, including the SARS-CoV-2 viruses, so they actually exhibit the seasonal trends. And in fact, the seasonal trends which are exhibited by these respiratory viruses are primarily responsible for the surge of the COVID-19 pandemic now. And in fact, the seasonal trends of these respiratory virus are primarily guided by the humidity levels in the atmosphere and even the temperature and the crowding of the public as well. And we all knew that most of the Indian cities are overcrowded, so therefore there is a high possibility or probability of the COVID-19 subvariants would even infect the individuals. But here there is no cause for worry because already there is a primary level immunity. There is already a primary immunity that has been developed against the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, even if the individuals are infected with the COVID-19 pandemic, there are no severe symptoms and there is no need for hospitalization. And in fact, the mortality rate is also very less because already antibodies or immunity has been developed for this COVID-19 pandemic and in fact various other variants of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, data from India has been indicating that this cyclical surge of various respiratory virus would take place every 8 to 10 months since January 2022 Omicron wave. So therefore, this is a very common thing and there is no need to worry about the new surge in the COVID-19 pandemic. And here, the other very important thing that we should understand here is that the SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus, and here the RNA viruses are more unstable. RNA viruses are more unstable and they even naturally undergo frequent mutations as well. Since they undergo frequent mutations, so that leads to the development of various minor subvariants of the SARS-CoV-2. So therefore, there is no need for worry since it is unstable, so it will result in frequent mutations within the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And apart from that, these changes have not led to the increased virulence or hospitalizations or even mortality among the people. So therefore, there is no need to worry about this particular wave of the COVID-19 infections. And the current surge is partially attributed to the increased COVID-19 testing as well. Because of the COVID-19 created fears, there is an increased diagnosis and increased testing of number of individuals to the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of this particular reason, so there are more number of cases that we are regularly hearing about the COVID-19 pandemic, because it is not a phenomenon that is limited to India alone, but there are other countries also such as Singapore and Thailand, and in these countries there is a significant increase in the number of COVID-19 cases. And because of the international travel, we also started the diagnostic tests. So we have increased the diagnostic tests for the COVID-19 pandemic, and because of that reason, in India also more people are tested positive for the COVID-19 virus. So even though they are tested positive for the COVID-19 virus, there is no need for any concern. However, in our last lecture, we have understood what is innate immunity means and acquired immunity means. Remember, for your exam point of view, both innate immunity and acquired immunity are very, very important, and you should also remember these two different types of immunities. So when we talk about innate immunity, so innate immunity specifically deals with the defense system which individual actually has from the birth itself, right? So it actually means that an individual would have developed the immunity right from his or her birth. Now when we talk about the acquired immunity is not developed from the birth of the individual, rather through the vaccines or rather through the immunization drives the person would get the acquired immunity. But innate immunity is by birth is developed in the human being, and in fact both innate immunity and acquired immunity will play a very, very important role when it comes to fighting the disease causing pathogens. Secondly, the defense mechanism consisting of various types of barriers that interrupt the entry of pathogens, and one example is a skin. So skin is an example of innate immunity. But on the other hand, when we talk about the acquired immunity, so the defense system consisting of specialized B and T cells, including antibodies that circulate in the human body. So when we talk about the innate immunity, so this defense system sustains throughout the life, but acquired immunity, this system may be either short life or long life as well. So this is the difference between innate immunity and acquired immunity. So when we are being administered with the Covaxin vaccine or the Covishield vaccine, so what type of an immunity that we develop? So acquired immunity is the kind of an immunity that we develop through the vaccines that are being administered to us. I hope you have understood this. However, here the key concern is that there is no problem or there is no major threat to the public healthcare system because of the new variants of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, so one thing that we should understand here is that so we should not divert our attention from the existing diseases, the existing issues to the COVID-19 pandemic, because that would cost us a lot. That is what here this particular article has been telling us. So the concept of active cases is outdated, because as individuals now become non-infectious, imagine that there is an individual who is now infected with the COVID-19 pandemic, but this particular individual is already acquired immunity for the COVID-19 pandemic, and this very same immunity would also deal with the new variants of the COVID-19 pandemic. And because of the antibodies which are already developed inside this particular individual, so the most of the new variants of the COVID-19 virus would be non-infectious, and he would not spread the disease to the other individuals. Even if he spread the disease to other individuals, they are not that effective that it would lead to the hospitalization, it would lead to the mortality of the individuals. And in fact, the continuing to use the metric will distort the real public health threat. Now here, what is the real public health threat that India has been facing? For example, there are around 8,000 TB cases every day that are reported in India, and 900 TB deaths. So this is a very, very serious problem that we should focus on, instead of focusing on just 200-300 daily cases of the COVID-19 pandemic, that too non-infectious, non-serious, and there are no severe symptoms in these COVID-19 cases. So therefore, we should not divert our attention to the key public health issues such as tuberculosis. And it's not just about the tuberculosis. Air pollution related respiratory mortality in India is also very high, and in fact in India majority number of cities have been facing the problem of air pollution as well. So if I can tell you the examples, cities like Delhi and Lucknow, Bangalore, Mumbai, all these cities have been facing the air pollution related respiratory mortality. So the real focus should be on these issues instead of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, the overall health burden of the COVID-19 is currently minor. So therefore, there is no need for adequate attention that should be given to the COVID-19 pandemic, diverting our attention to these important issues. And in fact, no additional vaccine dose is also not required because the herd immunity or immunity has already developed for the COVID-19 pandemic. And in fact, most of the people in India are already immunized, or they have developed the broad hybrid immunity, and no variant of concern necessitates the booster campaigns. So there is a consensus, or there is a concern that because of the resurfacing of the COVID-19 cases, it is being felt that there is a need for the booster doses of the COVID vaccine, but there is no need for any booster campaigns for this COVID-19 virus because most of the variants are non-infectious in nature. And in fact, the focus should be on preventing the comorbidities which are associated with these non-communicable diseases or communicable diseases, and even vaccinating the high risk groups for other respiratory infections. But our focus should not be solely on dealing with the COVID-19 virus. There are other number of issues, so public healthcare system should focus on these issues as well. This is what the author has been telling us. I hope you have understood this. And the next topic is, recently in the state of Manipur, a president's rule has been imposed. And remember, president's rule is also very important for your prelims and mains examination as well. And recently in prelims examination, a few questions on president rule has also been asked. So therefore, in this context, we'll understand what is this issue, what is this all about. And in fact, we all knew that there is a law and order there is a disturbance or law and order violation that has been taking place in the state of Manipur. And because of this particular reason, so the elected government in the state of Manipur resigned, and after that the president's rule has been imposed by the central government in the state of Manipur on February this year. So after the president's rule has been imposed, a number of different groups within the state of Manipur have been protesting against the president's rule, right? And in fact, recently a delegation of 10 MLAs from Manipur Legislative Assembly, so they have met the state governor and they have been demanding formation of the viable government immediately. So they don't want the president's rule, they no longer want it to be under the president's rule, and that's why these 10 MLAs have submitted a representation to the state governor. However, the Manipur is under the president's rule since February 2025, following a breakdown of the constitutional machinery amid the deteriorating security and even the political instability in the state of Manipur. And we have been regularly tracking the issue of the Manipur, or the law and order issue of the state of Manipur, because there is an ethnic violence between two different groups, the Meiteis as well as the Kukis. So therefore, this ethnic conflict turned violent, and therefore there is a need for the president's rule to ensure peace and order in the state of Manipur. Because of that reason, the governor has recommended the president's rule in the state of Manipur. Now we will understand some important provisions with respect to president's rule. And one thing that we should understand here is that Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, it deals with the president's rule. And you can see there are number of articles right from Article 352 of the Indian Constitution. So it talks about the national emergency, but Article 356 of the Indian Constitution, it deals with the provisions in case of the constitutional machinery in states, right? So Article 356 of the Indian Constitution would deal with the president's rule. And in fact, Article 356 empowers the president to take the complete control of the state government if it fails to function according to the constitution. For example, if the center believes that, if the president believes that there is a failure of the constitutional machinery and the administration is not carried out in such a manner that has been mentioned in the constitution, then there is a high probability that the president would impose president's rule under article 356 of the Indian constitution. And in fact, the president's rule is imposed on a particular state based on the report of the governor, and once the president's rule has been imposed in a particular state, it compulsorily require the parliamentary approval within 2 months by a simple majority. And don't confuse with this, so it is very very important, and it is very very simple as well. Now imagine in the state of Manipur, a president's rule has been imposed, and after imposing the president's rule, this has to be approved by the parliament within 2 months. So how many days? Within 2 months it has to be approved by the parliament with just a simple majority. I hope it is clear for you. And now when we talk about the duration of the president's rule in a particular state, or further extension of the president's rule in a state, initially it is only for 6 months. For example, the president has imposed president's rule in the state of Manipur, and within 2 months it has got the parliamentary approval through a simple majority, and now the duration of the president's rule is for 6 months only. However, after or beyond 6 months, it can be extended up to 3 years. It can be extended up to 3 years in a 6 increments with the parliamentary approvals, right? So it must requires the parliamentary approval, and it can be extended up to 3 years, right? So these two provisions are very very important, and don't confuse these provisions. And in fact, when we talk about Article 356, the most challenging and most pressing issue is frequent misuse of Article 356 of the Indian Constitution. And regarding Article 356, what was Ambedkar said? And in fact, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar held that Article 356 was intended as a safeguard, and he also hoped that it was never to be invoked against any state. But after independence, what has been happening is that if there is a change in the government at the center, then the governors would be changed. And in fact, Article 356 is also very frequently used to change the opposition ruled governments in the states. So therefore, what Ambedkar believed, that Article 356 should never be invoked, but after independence, after constitution coming into force, the number of times Article 356 has been used by the central government in an indiscriminate manner, and this has led to the abuse or misuse of Article 356. And in fact, historically, Article 356 has been used to dismiss the elected state governments on political grounds rather than on the constitutional necessity. So if there is a constitutional necessity, then of course the president can use Article 356 to impose the president's rule. But in recent times, Article 356 has been more often used for the political reasons instead of the constitutional compulsions or the necessities. I hope you have understood this. And in fact, there are a lot of examples where the Article 356 has been misused, and these all articles are very very important. Please kindly go through all important articles, and you should also remember them. And when you are writing the mains answer, so please reproduce these articles in your answer so that it will enhance or strengthen your answer. And with respect to the misuse of Article 356, there are various judgments of the Supreme Court. So let's try to understand the judgments of the Supreme Court regarding the misuse or abuse of Article 356. In S.R. Bommai judgment of 1994, the Supreme Court has held that federalism is part of the basic structure doctrine. And apart from that, the Supreme Court has also held that Article 356 misuse or abuse should be restricted. And in fact, the Supreme Court has outrightly held that President's rule can only be imposed during the constitutional machinery breakdown, and that has been clearly mentioned in Article 356. And in fact, the usage of Article 356 should only as a constitutional necessity, and it should not be used for the political reasons. So if the president believes that there is a breakdown of the constitutional machinery, then only Article 356 has to be used. For example, if there is a law and order issue in a state, the president cannot impose the president's rule, because what generally happens, showing the law and order issues or law and order failures in a particular state, the central government has been arbitrarily imposing president's rule on that particular state. And in this context, the Supreme Court has given this judgment in SR Bommai case. And secondly, the Supreme Court has also held that the imposition of the president's rule is subjected to the judicial scrutiny. That essentially means that the imposition of president's rule now come under the judicial review of the Supreme Court. And in fact, the legislative assemblies should not be dissolved before the parliamentary approval. So this is also held by the Supreme Court as well. However, in subsequent judgments, the Supreme Court has viewed the misuse of Article 356 in a very critical manner, and the Supreme Court has outrightly said that there should not be any arbitrary imposition of the president's rule on any state. It should be solely based on the constitutional necessity. It should be solely based on the constitutional machinery breakdown in that particular state. And in fact, there was an abuse of the president's rule in the state of Bihar in the year 2005, and the Supreme Court has struck down the president's rule imposition in the state of Bihar in 2005, and in Uttarakhand in 2016, and Arunachal Pradesh again in 2016 by the central government. However, remember this, whenever you write the answer, please mention all these important examples in your answer, because they will enrich your answer. Now, what has been happening in the state of Manipur? So there is no doubt there is a law and order issue or a failure of the law and order in the state of Manipur, and there is a violence among different ethnic groups within the state of Manipur, and it could even threaten the internal security of the entire nation as well. And because of that particular reason, the central government has decided to use Article 356 to impose president's rule in the state of Manipur on February 2025. I hope it is clear for you. Now, what is the significance of Article 356 in India's federal structure? We have understood what was the opinion of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar with respect to Article 356. However, Article 356 plays a very, very important role when it comes to protecting or strengthening the federal structure. And in fact, Article 356 was essentially conceived as a constitutional safety valve, because Article 356 would protect the states and the union. But in recent times, the Article 356 has been misused for the political reasons, and this has been weakening the federal structure when the central government has been using Article 356 for political compulsions, political reasons, for their self-benefit. It has been weakening the federal structure of the Indian Constitution. So remember, in SR Bommai judgment of 1994, the Supreme Court has held that federalism is a basic structure of the Indian Constitution, and Article 356 should not be misused. So I hope you have understood this article. And the next important article is that India and Paraguay relations. Now, in fact, Paraguay is a small and a tiny country in the South American continent, and in fact, for the UPSC prelims examination, South America is a very, very important continent, because every year you can expect at least 1 or 2 questions from South America, whether it is mountains or rivers or countries, minerals. So all these are a very, very important aspects that you need to talk about, you need to look into when we talk about the South American continent. So however, what has been happening is that recently a Paraguayan president paid an official visit to India, and in this context we will be discussing India and Paraguay relations and India and some Latin America relations in general, right? So the context is that India and Paraguay have recently held a high level talks in New Delhi, and in fact These high-level talks between India and Paraguay have resulted in enhanced cooperation in number of areas. These areas including clean energy, green hydrogen, biofuels, and cybersecurity. Now, India is a country which has a huge energy demand. And in fact, India is a country which has been trying to look for the energy transition from the fossil fuel dependence to the renewable fuels. And in this context, clean energy is an important aspect because majority of the Latin American countries have the critical minerals that India required for making a successful transition into the clean energy, green hydrogen, and biofuels, particularly with countries like Brazil in Latin America and even the cybersecurity domains. So these are the important areas that both India and Paraguay have discussed in this high level talks that were held in New Delhi. However, this actually marks a significant step in further strengthening the bilateral relations and even expanding economic, technological, and strategic ties between both India and Paraguay. Now, in this context, we will understand the India and Paraguay relations, when they were established, what were the major pillars of the bilateral relationship between India and Paraguay. Now, one thing that we should understand here is that both India and Paraguay have established their diplomatic relations way back in the year 1961, and in fact, over 6 decades, the relationship between India and Paraguay matured, and in fact, it has taken to the next level, and both countries enjoyed warm and cooperative relationship, particularly as part of the framework of South-South cooperation. And in fact, India is a major country within the South, within the global South, and India is also considered as the leader of the global South as well. So as part of the framework of South-South cooperation, both India and Paraguay have cooperated in a very friendly manner. And in fact, it is being said that Paraguay is located in the heart of South America. So I will also show you the location of Paraguay as well. So Paraguay is actually located at the heart of the Latin America. So somewhere here, so Paraguay is located somewhere here. So it is located at the heart of the Latin America. And in fact, Paraguay has the strategic importance for India's engagement with the whole Latin American region. So generally, it is being said that when we talk about India's engagement with Latin America, so India has been engaging at a the overall engagement of India with Latin America. The overall engagement of India with Latin America is very narrow engagement. We don't have a larger engagement with the Latin America. So however, if we started engaging with the Paraguay, since it is the heart of the Latin American continent and it is also having strategic importance, so there is a higher probability that we could actually convert this engagement with Paraguay with a larger engagement with the whole Latin American continent. But on the other hand, there are countries like China who have a strong presence in Latin American countries, and India also losing out to China. So therefore, this is the time that India should focus on the Latin American continent in general and countries like Paraguay in particular, because these are the countries which have a huge mineral resources. For example, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. So they are called as lithium triangle. So lithium is a very important mineral for clean energy transition. And apart from that, so these countries also have a huge fossil fuels as well. Apart from mineral resources, they have a huge fossil fuels, and they also have a huge land for agriculture or agricultural cooperation with India. And similarly, we should also talk about the South-South cooperation, because these countries are located in the global South, and most of these countries are also part of the non-aligned movement. So because of all these different reasons, and these countries are also one of the biggest market for Indian goods, so they can actually become one of the biggest market for the Indian goods, and India also require support from these countries for UNSC reforms and India's permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. For all these different reasons, Latin America is very, very important. We can no longer neglect, or we can no longer afford neglecting Latin America, right? So in recent delegation level talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and also Paraguayan President Santiago Pena Palcois. So the delegation level talks actually signifies a renewed movement in bilateral ties, and thereby focusing on emerging and critical sectors, right? So there are a number of sectors we have just discussed. For example, the cybersecurity domain is one sector, and counter-terrorism or combating terrorism is another sector. Clean energy, biofuels, and green hydrogen. So these are number of areas, number of fronts that both India and Latin American countries and even Paraguay can actually cooperate on. And in fact, both India and Latin America, so they agreed to enhance cooperation in clean energy initiatives, including the green hydrogen and even the biofuels as well. And in fact, this actually aligns with India's National Hydrogen Mission. So remember that we already launched National Hydrogen Mission. So we also have several ambitious goals that we would like to achieve by the year 2030. And in fact, this particular clean energy initiative is aligned with National Green Hydrogen Mission of India and India's commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement to increase the share of renewable energy mix. Remember, we have the Glasgow commitments, or these commitments are also called as the Panchamrit commitments. So in order to achieve these commitments, so India need to make a faster transition into the clean energy. So in order to make a faster transition into the clean energy, we need to focus on both biofuels. With respect to biofuels, countries in Latin America have a huge advantage, and apart from biofuels, we should also focus on the green hydrogen aspect as well. So therefore, India can cooperate with most of the countries in the Latin America on this particular front. And in fact, Paraguay's interest in these different sectors actually complements India's expertise and even investment capabilities in clean energy domains, particularly green hydrogen development, biofuels, and cyber security as well. And similarly, both India and Paraguay have a shared multilateral and global perspectives on number of different areas. So when we talk about that, both countries actually align on crucial international issues such as United Nations reforms, and both countries supporting efforts to make UN more representative. So we all knew that the United Nations Security Council is not representative body because it is stagnated with just 5 countries alone, and there is no other country which is part of United Nations Security Council permanent member. However, only these 5 countries completely dominating the UNSC would not be acceptable for the rest of the world. So UNSC should be more representative, and UNSC should be given representation to the aspiring and emerging countries like India. And in fact, we also knew that the G4 is a grouping that has been established, which has been seeking reforms or broader reforms or expansion of the United Nations Security Council. However, Paraguay has extended its support to India to become part of the United Nations Security Council. So therefore, there is a need for the reform within the United Nations Security Council. Similarly, both India and Paraguay have reaffirmed the commitment to advancing the global climate action, and both countries recognize the need for sustainable development and the clean energy transition as well. So as part of this, both India and Paraguay have been cooperating on the developing clean energy, biofuels, National Green Hydrogen Mission as well. And in fact, global security is a key and emerging concern for both India and Paraguay. So therefore, in order to ensure global security, both these countries have taken coordinated positions on counter-terrorism. And in fact, recently on Pahalgam terror attack, so around 26 people were killed in a terrorist attack. So therefore, a counter-terrorism and zero tolerance towards terrorism is always the policy of India, and these two countries have reinforced their commitment to the counter-terrorism. And apart from that, for India, strengthening ties with Paraguay would help further diversify India's diplomatic and economic partnerships with the Latin America. As I have already told you that India has been less focusing on the Latin American continent, but this is the time that India should focus more on the Latin American continent, because Latin America is known for its rich mineral resources. Latin America is known for the markets, demographic dividend, agriculture cooperation, NAM countries, and South-South cooperation as well. So therefore, it is the time that India should further focus more vigorously on the Latin America continent. And in fact, this actually supports India's Act East and even the Latin America outreach policies, thereby overall balancing the global partnerships and also further expanding trade and investment horizons as well. For Paraguay, the partnership with India actually offers access to technological know-how, investments in clean energy transition, biofuels, green hydrogen, cybersecurity, and in fact, Paraguay would also get India's support in global platforms and even aiding the developmental priorities as well. So Paraguay's infrastructure could be developed, India's technical capabilities, India's investments in number of these areas would further enhance Paraguay's development and its transition towards the cleaner energy as well, right? So this is how India and Paraguay have been further strengthening their bilateral relations. So through engaging with Paraguay, so you can see here, this is the location of Paraguay through engaging with Paraguay. So that's why we call it heart of Latin America. So this is located heart of Latin America. By engaging with Paraguay, so India is focusing on the larger engagement with the entire Latin American continent. Remember, I have already told you that as of now, India's engagement with the entire Latin American continent is very limited, but Latin America is very important for India. So therefore, through engaging with countries like Paraguay, India wanted to further strengthen its overall engagement with the Latin American continent. But as of now, countries like China have a huge presence in the Latin American countries, and India would face a huge competition from those countries if it planned to expand or further enhance its engagement with the Latin American countries. Now, so there is a brief content on India Latin America historical relations have been given. So after India's independence, right from 1947 till 1990s, there was a limited engagement of India with the Latin American countries, and multilateral support has been extended, and most of these Latin American countries are part of the non-alignment policy. So on the sidelines of the non-alignment policy, India had a minimal engagement with majority of these countries, and South-South cooperation, because Latin America is part of the global South and India was also part of the global South as well. And in fact, when we talk about the trade and investment, it was a very modest scale, so it was not at a peak or a progressive state. However, we all knew that during 1990s, India opened up its economy through the LPG reforms, which are also called as the liberalization, privatization and globalization. However, the second phase is called as 1990s to 2014, and during this particular period, there are very frequent high level visits by the prime ministers from India, and India even launched Look West policy and Focus LAC program, Focus the Latin American countries program. And in fact, India's trade with the Latin American countries also reached to 42 billion by the year 2013, and in fact, India signed the preferential trade agreements with Mercosur and countries like Chile. So Mercosur is again a trade bloc of few countries in the Latin American continent. And 2014, we all knew that the Narendra Modi led BJP government came to power, and after Narendra Modi government came to power, so there were very frequent visits by the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, and strategic engagement, strategic partnerships, and even the institutionalization of India through number of programs or platforms in the Latin American continent. So I would say that there is a more proactive engagement with the Latin American countries during the Modi era from 2014. So I hope you have understood this. And the next very important topic is S-400 missile system. This is S-400 missile defense system. So this is in news because of it successfully intercepted Pakistani drones, Pakistani missiles, and in fact S-400 missile defense system actually helped India during the Operation Sindoor by protecting its civilian population. And in fact, we lovingly call S-400 missile defense system as India's Sudarshan Chakra. I think during Operation Sindoor, many of us have heard about this S-400 missile defense system. So we'll try to understand what is this S-400 missile defense system, why it is so special. So India acquired S-400 Triumph air defense system from Russia through a contract that was signed in the year 2018 worth of 35,000 crores rupees. And in fact, so US threatened India that if India purchases S-400 missile defense system, then US would sanction India under the CAATSA Act. So CAATSA actually means the Countering American Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. So despite the threat of CAATSA, India go ahead with the S-400 missile defense system, and because of the good relations between India and the USA had not imposed these CAATSA sanctions on India despite India purchasing the S-400 missile defense system from Russia. However, 3 of the 5 contracted S-400 squadrons have already been delivered to India, with the first unit delivered to India in 2021 as well. Now, in fact, the system was successfully used to intercept the drones and even the missile attacks from Pakistan, particularly during Operation Sindoor. However, India has deployed around 4 S-400 squadrons at strategic locations all along the Pakistan, considering the threat perception such as Pathankot, Rajasthan, Gujarat, and in fact, after getting the remaining S-400 missile defense systems, there are plans that we will further deploy them to the northeastern border to effectively face the threats of China as well. And in fact, Russia is even developing S-500 missile defense system, and it is also said that India will procure the S-500 missile defense system if it believes that the S-500 missile defense system would effectively protect India's interests and India's security. So some more details with respect to S-400 missile defense system have been clearly given here. And in fact, if we talk about the characteristic features of the S-400 missile defense system, it can engage all types of aerial targets, including aircraft, unmanned aerial vehicles, and even all types of missiles. And the S-400 missile defense system can locate the targets at 600 kilometers, and it can even destroy them at 400 kilometer range to an altitude of 30 kilometers. So these are some special and specific characteristics of S-400 missile defense system. And in fact, the S-400 missile defense system can even engage multiple targets simultaneously, and this is another big advantage of the S-400 missile defense system. Now, if we talk about what it actually consisting of, it consists of the multifunction radar and anti-aircraft missile systems. It also consisting of launchers and the autonomous detection and targeting systems and command and control center. So therefore, the S-400 missile defense system is actually equipped with all these different units. And in fact, if we talk about the range of the missiles which are part of the S-400 missile defense system, so they are capable of firing different types of missiles to create a layered defense shield. So you can see here how S-400 missile defense system would actually form a layered defense defense shield. So therefore, during Operation Sindoor, it has effectively protected the civilian populations from the drone attacks of Pakistan, right? So it is actually a huge success for India. So India going ahead with purchasing of S-400 missile defense system is a wise choice or a wise decision, right? So you can also go through the other details of the S-400 missile defense system here, right? So in fact, the 5 squadrons of S-400 missile defense systems that India has purchased at a cost of $5.43 billion, right? So it has certain characteristics that it can destroy the hostile strategic bombers, stealth fighters, missiles, drones up to 380 kilometer range. And in fact, 4 kinds of missiles are fitted into the S-400 missile defense system with different ranges and radars. The primary acquisition one has 600-meter range, and that can track hundreds of missiles simultaneously, and it can even intercept hundreds of missiles simultaneously. And in fact, Russia sees S-400 radar lock and shoot down 5th generation stealth fighters like US fighter jets F-35 as well, right? So these are the some details with respect to the S-400 missile defense system. And in fact, there was a mains question that was asked on S-400 missile defense system. So therefore, this is very important topic for your prelims and mains examination also, because of its a huge role in Operation Sindoor. There is a probability that this question might be asked in this year mains examination again, and next year prelims examination. So anyway, that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. If you really like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you so much.